What if the reason that you're struggling to be productive and to stay consistent with your goals is because of your anxiety? And maybe you're not even aware of how your anxiety is affecting you, and if you have anxiety or not. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can do both, how you can manage that anxiety and still be productive. So keep watching. The most powerful way to be productive while you have anxiety are two words that you don't really hear on YouTube and in videos like this, and they are your ability to relate and regulate. What I mean by this is, number one, we are social creatures. We have a safety when we feel connected to the people that are important to us, and that's why it's important that we are relating well to those individuals. And number two, that part I'm talking about here, is your ability to regulate. Often the reason why we are struggling to get things done and we might be judging ourselves as being lazy is not because we're lazy, it's actually the opposite. We're struggling to regulate our emotions, the things that are coming up. Now, I've talked about this in previous videos, that we have three psychological minds: the chimp, the human, and the computer. The chimp is like your primitive brain, the part of your brain that thinks in a very black and white binary way. It's like a small child, like having a chimp at the wheel. There's a famous analogy of the elephant and the rider. If the elephant is in control, then you're going to be at risk. It's going to be highly emotional. And the reason why people use this analogy is because the elephant is more powerful than you. And it also responds to information 8 times faster than the rational mind. Often when people realize this, they try to control their chimp, control their emotions, and really box it in. But here's the thing, you can't suppress that part of the brain. Instead, you have to learn to better manage your chimp, aka managing your emotions. And there's 3 really effective ways to do that. Now, if you want to distract your chimp, and let's say you don't have the time to really deal with this properly and in a sustainable way, there are some immediate things you can do. Things like going for a walk, taking a 5-minute meditation. But longer term, we have to work on something to figure out what's the reason for this anxiety. And if you want to be productive, there's something else that you can do that most people don't think of doing, which you've probably heard of. And that is working with a trained professional, working with a psychologist, a therapist, or a highly trained and accredited life coach. The problem is, these days on social media, anyone and everyone can give you life advice. And so because there's so much content out there, we have to work harder to figure out the things that are really meaningful and worthwhile in pursuing, and the things that are not, the things that are toxic, and teaching us toxic positive ideas of
everybody has time. Stop watching Lost.
Stay ready, you ain't gotta get ready.
And that puts an incredible amount of pressure on the individual to figure things out. And instead, when you're working with a psychologist, you're going to start approaching these things with curiosity to figure out, where did this thinking come from? You weren't born with anxiety. At some point, it became a learned behavior. Now, that may be the result of mental health issues, intergenerational trauma. It may be the result of the country you're living in. Our circumstances are so unique. And that's why I say, working with a psychologist, working with someone who is a trained professional, not your friends or family who have their own biases, their own agendas when they give us advice, although it may be from a well-meaning and well-intentioned place, but someone objective, someone who has trained their whole life to help you with these exact issues. That's going to be one of the most powerful ways to build more productivity. If you are struggling with anxiety and you're trying to be productive, because you do need to get things done at the end of the day, maybe you've got a job or an assignment or things to get done. For me, one of the things that it boils down to are the following 2 words, and I want you to write this down and ingrain it in your memory, and it's psychological safety. When you come from a place of ease, it's more effortless to create, to get things done, and you're not forcing it. That's been one of the benefits of working with coaches, mentors, therapists, all these different peoples in different ways to approach the problem in a multifaceted way. The idea is we want to reduce the impact of the parasympathetic nervous system here. And something that's been really helpful for me, for example, is the daily habit of at least every week going to the gym 4 times, lifting weights, making sure I'm on the treadmill, moving around. Because what happens when we exercise is that it depletes our stores of cortisol, the stress hormone, and we release that endogenous amount of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all these different chemicals that help us to feel better about ourselves. And the common thing that most people tend to do, the mistake that I think we often turn to, is what we call exogenous highs, or modes of helping ourselves to relate and regulate our states. And an example of that might be something like scrolling on your phone because you're bored, or drinking a cup of coffee because you're tired. You're relying on something external to create an internal state. Whereas when we learn to do that endogenously, so within the chemicals of our own body, it's much more sustained. The other thing I want to mention here is a very important question that no one seems to ask. And it's, what is productivity? How do I want to measure what success is and isn't? And if that comes from me, that's great. But if it comes from someone else and it's force-fed into me through cultural messaging, social media, all these other things, it's going to be more harmful than it is helpful. A point that I want to emphasize here is there is often what we call a window of tolerance, where we oscillate between being hyper-aroused and hypo-aroused. Hypo-aroused is when we're in a very low mood, we're very lethargic, we're apathetic. And hyper-aroused is like this anxious, motivated state. And sometimes our productivity, these people that you admire on your feeds, maybe they're in an anxious, motivated state. We don't know. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes when the camera is turned off. And you know that classic quote, we measure our behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. And I ask you, what is your window of tolerance and where are you? Are you working from an anxious, motivated state or from a more calm, motivated state? And if you want to learn how to build that state on a consistent basis, just using 2 simple steps, check out my discovery mini course. I'll link it down in the description. If you use the code SAMOSA, you get 10% off. And we go through that in the mini course. How can we create a very grounded flow state on command, where at the flip of a switch, we're able to move into a very regulated state where we can be focused and we can be more productive, whatever that looks like for you. I'll definitely do a video on this topic of window of tolerance later on, so make sure you subscribe and you turn on the bell notifications as well. Click here to watch another video.